Today we'll be doing most of the plumbing on the car. So Dustin is doing the first oil lines back in. These will go up towards the front to the remote oil filter mount. So there's two fittings on the back side, and they'll go up, and there'll be two fittings on the front side at the remote mount. Now we're at the remote mount. You can see the 45-degree fittings we have here. Those give us the routing that we need, get the lines down under the engine and around to the back side. So two fittings here. Some cars will have a slightly different remote filter mount than what you're seeing here, but the basic line routing would be the same. Next is the oil cooler. Cooler has tabs on the top and the bottom as it comes from the manufacturer. We need to cut these tabs off the bottom side just for the way we mount it. And then we add some foam strips here as well, just so when it's sitting in the car, it's got some cushioning there. So the oil lines from the oil pan will route up to the oil cooler. This is the first line. You've got two connections here on the bottom side of the oil pan. These are both -8 sizes. One of those lines will run up to the bottom left side of the oil cooler. The other one will run up here to the top right side of the oil cooler. Next, we're doing fuel lines. We get the fuel tanks from Saldana with a -8 size fitting there. Most of the cars are running -8s to the filter and up to the motor plate. So that's what we're showing here as well. Some cars with the larger fuel tanks may have the pickup coming from the bottom and then from the filter up to the motor plate. Got a bulkhead fitting at the motor plate side, and that's where we'll make the transition from the -8 size that's coming from the filter to the -6s that goes to the pump. On the front side, now, like I said, -6 lines from the motor plate. That'll go up to our shutoff valve here, which will get mounted to the dash. So we'll go up to the shutoff valve and then back down to the fuel pump. I think I mentioned in the previous video, we're running a slightly different fuel pump on this build than some of the other cars have. I'm just trying to save a few bucks and come up with a more economical solution. So this line will now run back down to that fuel pump. Good thing about this fuel pump is it does have threaded in fitting, so you can run a -6 line directly to it, where the other NOS fuel pump just has barbed fitting, so you're using hose clamps and things like that. This is a little bit more clean, a little more reliable design than with the rubber hose pushed onto the barbed fittings. So now coming out of the fuel pump, this line will route back up and go to the carburetors, which another nice thing is we can run a -6 on the carburetor now as well. So we can have a threaded fitting there instead of a push-on connection with a barb and a hose clamp. So here's your overview of the fuel lines. Carburetor down to the pump, up to the shutoff valve, back around through the motor plate, fuel filter, and then back to your tank.
All right, so we're gonna start putting together some of the brake system stuff. This is the master cylinder kit we use from Willwood. We use the side mount version for the Kenyon Midgets, and we're using the 3/4 inch size. So these kits are really nice. They come with everything you need to mount your reservoir remotely or mount it right on the master cylinder, or however you want to do it. So we're gonna do a few things to this. First, we will use a remote reservoir mount, so we'll be taking this reservoir off. We'll be adding the piece that allows for the remote reservoir. They've got these nice little clamps. Slide that down, make sure it's down over the O-ring, nice and straight. Tighten the clamp. Then once we get this on the car, we'll run a hose from here and have this remoted or mounted remotely. Next up, on our cars, the master cylinder is mounted fairly low And Will would suggest that if your master cylinder is mounted below the level of your calipers at all, you don't want gravity letting your fluid flow back from your calipers and basically pulling your pistons away from your pads. So we'll utilize this little 2 psi residual pressure valve that we mounted here at the master cylinder, and it will keep 2 psi of pressure in your lines to keep your pads pushed out against your rotors. So this is that guy. It's marked very clearly which side the master cylinder goes, which side goes out to your brake lines. So we'll get that ready to go. This is an 1/8 NPT hole, so we've got a fitting here that we'll use for that union. Union just threads right in. Nice and snug, and then we'll thread the pressure tension valve on the other end of the union. After that, the other end of that, we'll just put our little AN union there so we can put our brake lines right onto it. Look who's here. Bug's coming to help again. All right, so that end's ready to go. Once we get this in the car, we'll start running brake lines to it and run our remote reservoir. Other end, this will attach to our brake pedal. This is just the rod end that we'll use for that. We'll get this threaded on. We won't really put it in place and tighten down the jam nut yet. We'll adjust all that stuff once it's in the car and we have brake fluid going to everything. So that's that, ready to go. All right, here we are at the car now. We'll put the master on, a little dab of blue Loctite. Just mounts to these bosses that are already on the chassis for us. Next, we'll attach the linkage to the pedal. So the pedal symbol is in the car. One thing we're going to want to do here is put a couple of washers behind the rod end, just to make sure we don't have any issues with it rubbing the body of the rod end rubbing against the pedal here. Next, we'll move up to the firewall a little bit and mount the reservoir. So here's the reservoir mounting bracket that comes with the kit. The reservoir that we're going to use. There's a reservoir in place. Got some hose. This is just pressed onto a barb fitting here. Pressed on there. And we'll run this and we'll cut this to length. Find a place to cut it. Probably tie it down to the side here and come back up. So we'll make sure this doesn't have any kinks in it. Make sure it's away from the pedal itself. Have somewhere that you can tie it down with a couple zip ties and get it where you want it to go. So we're going to leave a little bit extra length on here. We'll cut it about right there. Right, so we'll zip tie that up, clean that up a little bit. We'll get our brake lines routed as well before we start zip tying stuff down. But yeah, master cylinder's in place. Still some adjustments to do once everything is filled and lines are run, and we'll go from there. All right, now that the master cylinder and everything is mounted to the frame, we've got most of the brake lines routed. So just to give you a little overview, the line from the master, we just run up here and we're putting a T in place up on the motor plate, the firewall basically. And then from there, we're coming back this way for the rear and going across for the front. Most of these cars in the past were done with hard lines, and just for simplicity's sake, we're just using flexible lines all the way through the car here. So it's a little bit different than what some of the existing cars might have. And you'll see some tabs that are for the hard lines that we're not necessarily using. For example, back here, there's a tab that we're not using, but the rear brake line just runs along the side of the cockpit here. And we'll come back here to the rear brake caliper. So that's ready to go. For the front of the car, you can see this line running across the motor plate. It's got a little clamp here to hold it in place. And then it comes across the top outer rail to the front of the car with a T fitting here. So this T will splice over to come across to the left side. And then this will be where we connect our brake line for the right front corner. So for the left side, we're just coming across the top of the oil cooler area, and this will come out to the caliper once the front axle's in. So here's one of the tabs we're not using, but that's there for the hard lines. If you want to do a hard line across the car here and just have a fitting for your left front caliper, you could do that as well. So pretty simple, but brake lines are in.